shroud, I think, was a good combination of both, because when I first started knitting, you know, I got about 6 inches of it. It was originally for a friend's show. She was curating a show at the Skylight Gallery in Brooklyn, where it was kind of like wearable art. And I knitted 6 inches of it, and it suddenly wanted me to use it. It was not enough to just knit something for a gallery. It really had to be used. And that's where I got the whole idea for Unwrapping Lazarus, and to use it in performance art. And you know, it's more, maybe similar to like African masks or Native American masks, because there's something within it, you know. There's something symbolic, and that's why it could never be sold.
And Robin, do you have a preference? Do you knit form or function, or what is it that inspires you to pick up the needles? And
yeah, well, compulsion, definitely. You know, I was thinking about that, and I realized a lot of the time I knit, I guess, not for function, I can say that pretty honestly, but I think I actually knit for as much the concept of knitting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I think, well, sort of in that same way I was talking about with the gesture of resistance, to knit when you can go and buy a pair of socks at the department store.
Not those socks.
Not like these.
I know, but you know, if you need socks,
Don't even
it's quicker and cheaper to go and, go to a
mass
store.
produced.
So why do you knit them? You know, it's something else. And so that's maybe what brings me to knitting. It's that question, like, why?
Can you talk a little bit about some of the images that you sent, so the viewers can get a little insight of your thinking behind that?
Well, one of them is called the Memorials, the Doughboy, which actually was funded by the Queen's Council.
Yay!
As part of a project I was doing about memorials and what they mean, and I knit a cape, kind of a shroud, for a World War I memorial in Woodside, Queens. And it went from the statue's neck to over the base a little bit, and it was done in an Aran pattern. And it was about...
Could you explain that to people, what an Aran
pattern
pattern
is?
Yeah.
They're patterns that were developed in the Aran Islands off of Ireland, and there's a lot of myth about how they developed, but I think at this point we realized they were made in the early 20th century as a commercial endeavor, but people like to imbue a lot of myth about their ancient Celtic symbols. So I like that kind of invented tradition idea, and the way that memorials also are very, can be slow, invent a history, help invent history, and also how my covering the memorial was about how memorials, they are incomplete in the way they can't tell the whole story, and so I was kind of covering something that also covers something or obscures something in its way, even though it's done in a nice way, a good way, yeah. Another piece I had is called Seasonal Affected Disorder / baby cozy, and I made a cozy for a friend's baby, and it's knit, and then I put some chicken wire in it, and I lined it so there were no sharp points, and then as a performance my friend put it over her baby, and I photographed her sort of putting the baby in it and covering it. It had a little hole for the baby's face to look out of, and then just for like an instant I made a little cover for the hole.
So would that be a performance piece, Robin?
Yeah, it was. But like it was a performance of 3, but I documented it. Was a trio. And that piece actually is probably one of my most controversial pieces, because I've shown it in giving lectures, and people react very strongly to that, about the idea of covering this baby, that maybe it was somehow not a nice gesture, but my reason behind it was about talking about motherhood and how you can feel we have this idea of motherhood being very like Hallmark card, and in fact it's much more complicated, and I wanted to bring up some of those more complicated issues. So
that seems to be that's really the crux of what I invited the three of you here for, because I know that knitting is not just the simple act, or crocheting is not the simple act of just putting loops and stitches together, but each one of you have such an interesting take on meaning and how to construct meaning. So not only are you constructing something from a linear form into something solid, but you're also imbuing it with other layers of meaning, which is endlessly fascinating to me when I hear what the thinking was behind wrapping Lazarus or your gumball machine idea.
It's once I was taking the train, and I saw this punk woman knitting, you know, and I would just think to myself, like, what if she was a grandmother? What would she knit for her grandchildren? And this kind of opened up ideas, and I think this is how I started kind of really thinking about the actual process of knitting and what it really means. Because you don't, when you see a knitted product, you kind of envision the person behind it is a grandmother, you know, but not necessarily. It could be totally
Anybody.
Yeah, anyone, definitely.
Well, I brought something to show the audience. I knit rubber. I am a Canal Street junkie, and I go down to Canal Street and I buy whatever it is that I can hook around this thing. And I knit pocketbooks, so I really knit things that are strictly functional. But I, in some way, echo what Nancy does, is that I really like unusual fibers and textures. And this particular evening bag was crocheted in a very traditional pyramid stitch lined with patio chair lining so that it's completely waterproof. And when I clean it, I just hose it down in the garden. And to do that, I employ very simple stitches, which are the chain stitch. It's nothing extravagantly difficult, but it's that engagement of the unusual to produce something that is maybe a functional object, but it just lends a little bit more interest. It invites you to question it a little bit more. And for the record, I call these information systems, not pocketbooks, because this contains all the data that pertains to my life for that 24-hour period. I thought it might be interesting to just explore what your future projects might be, like so what are you knitting now? What are you planning to create in the future? What, you know, if there's any inspiration for what you're doing now into something else, or perhaps maybe a collaborative type of effort.
Yeah, I plan to definitely continue working in the fabric, not necessarily in crochet or knitting, but in the past, my grandma and I have done fabric works. There's this American flag, I think it was the first work we put together out of blue, red and white bandanas. And I cut the pieces out for her, and we lined them up, and she sewed them together. And for me, it visualizes the whole strife, you know, immigrants have in this country, because the bandana is usually worn on the blue-collar worker, you know, their heads, or wipe their sweat off their brow, this type of thing, you know. And I thought it was interesting for my grandma, especially, to knit it, you know, of gathered bandanas from working people.
Would this be a large piece? It sounds like it would be a large-scale work.
It was done over a 9-foot flag. Yeah, so it's just completely to proportion.
Nancy, do you have any thoughts?
Well, this, you know, I was thinking, what if everybody was obligated to knit their plastic, you know, instead of throwing it out? What if we, you know, that would really cut down the plastic in the landfill. I mean, and I even think about, you know, going to the store, and I've counted how many bags I've used. You know, it's about a dozen bags a week per person. And, you know, I really want to start using my own canvas bags now, just with the spot.
Canvas bags too?
Well, people are being encouraged to use canvas rather than the plastic bags. And I think San Francisco has banned plastic bags from grocery stores, because it's just filling up the landfill.